Welcome to this deep dive. It's all about forests. I have to admit, before I started getting ready for this, my thoughts about forests were pretty simple. I thought of trees, I thought of oxygen, maybe a squirrel or two.
Oh, yeah.
But as I started preparing for this, I realized how much I don't know about these incredible ecosystems. So luckily we have an expert with us to shed some light on forests in a whole new way. Ready to dive in?
I'm really excited. Forests are definitely more complex than people realize. They're not just a bunch of trees. They're these really intricate webs of life. They've shaped the planet, and they continue to play a vital role in the planet's health.
So first things first, how do we even define a forest? I always thought it was pretty straightforward. But I've heard there are different interpretations.
Yeah, you're right. It's really not that simple. There are hundreds of definitions that are used worldwide, which can make things confusing. But to kind of simplify it, imagine that you're looking at like an aerial photo. Is there enough tree cover to create a continuous canopy? That's one way to define a forest. But then you have the legal aspect. Governments might designate certain areas as forest, even if the tree cover isn't that dense for conservation or resource management purposes. And even areas without trees can be considered forest if they're intended for future tree planting or if they've been forested in the past. It really depends on who's doing the defining and what factors they're prioritizing.
So it's more than just what meets the eye. We have these different ways of defining forests today. But what about their history? How long have forests been around?
Oh, forests have been around for a really long time. Hundreds of millions of years. Just imagine a time before dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Wow.
That's when the first forests emerged way back in the Middle Devonian period, which was about 390 million years ago.
Wow, that is hard to even fathom. What did those ancient forests look like? Were there like giant redwoods casting long shadows?
Not quite redwoods, but there was this fascinating tree called Archaeopteris that dominated those early forests. And it was kind of a unique plant, a hybrid between a tree and a fern. And it could grow over 60 feet tall.
So like a prehistoric fern tree?
Yeah.
That's wild. What made Archaeopteris so special?
Well, it was a true pioneer species. It was the first plant to cast significant shade.
Oh, wow.
So just imagine a world without shady forests. And it played this really crucial role in creating soil from its roots and shedding its fronds, which would help form the forest floor as we know it. So Archaeopteris paved the way for the evolution of other plant and animal life, and it changed the planet's atmosphere and its ecosystems forever.
Wow. It's amazing to think that something so ancient had such a lasting impact on our world. It really makes you appreciate the long and interconnected history of forests.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's talk about the ecological importance of forests today. They're powerhouses of the biosphere, accounting for 75% of the Earth's gross primary productivity.
Okay. I have to admit, gross primary productivity, it sounds a little technical for me. Could you break that down?
Of course. So essentially, it's the total amount of energy that plants capture from the sun through photosynthesis. You can kind of think of it as the foundation of the whole entire food chain. It's the energy that fuels life on Earth, and forests are responsible for the majority of it. They also contain about 80% of the Earth's plant biomass, so that means they hold a vast amount of living matter.
Wow. That really put things into perspective. So forests are not just these pretty landscapes. They're literally fueling life on our planet. I'm starting to understand why they're called the lungs of the Earth.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And forests play a really crucial role in regulating the Earth's atmosphere and climate. So they absorb a vast amount of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. And they release oxygen, which we need to breathe. They influence biodiversity and water cycles and even weather patterns.
Speaking of weather, I read somewhere that the trees in the Amazon rainforest can actually influence rainfall. Is that true?
Yes, it is. So research shows that Amazonian trees, they release massive amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere. And so they create these clouds and they essentially trigger the rainy season. And so it's a fascinating example of how forests can actually regulate their own environment. This process even influences weather patterns far beyond the Amazon basin.
That's incredible. So disrupting the Amazon rainforest could have far-reaching consequences for weather patterns globally.
Exactly. Deforestation can really disrupt these delicate balances, leading to changes in rainfall and temperature and even the frequency of extreme weather events.
This is starting to paint a very different picture of forests for me. They're not just passive backdrops, but they're active players in shaping our world. It's both amazing and a little bit daunting to think about.
It is, and we've really only just scratched the surface. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the structure of a forest. Think of it like a multi-story building, with each layer supporting different forms of life. So you have The forest floor, which is this bustling world of decomposers, insects, fungi, and all sorts of creatures that break down organic matter and recycle nutrients. Then you have the understory with its shrubs and young trees and shade-tolerant plants. Above that is the canopy, which is formed by this dense network of branches and leaves of mature trees. And this is where most of the photosynthesis happens, and it's teeming with life. Birds, insects, monkeys, you name it. And then in some forests, like the tropical rainforest, you even have an emergent layer where a few giant trees tower above the canopy.
It's amazing to picture all those layers, each with its own unique ecosystem. It's like a city in the trees. So we've got these different layers within a forest, but then there are also different types of forests around the world.
Yes, we can categorize them broadly into 6 main types: temperate needleleaf, temperate broadleaf, and mixed, tropical moist, tropical dry, sparse trees and savanna, and plantations.
Wow, 6 different types. Let's take a quick tour of each one just to get a sense of their unique characteristics.
Okay, let's start with the temperate needleleaf forest, which you'll find in cooler regions like the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere. Think pine, fir, and spruce trees dominating the landscape with their long winters and relatively low biodiversity compared to other forest types.
Okay, so picture snowy landscapes and evergreen trees. What about temperate broadleaf and mixed forests?
These are what a lot of people think of when they imagine a classic forest. So they're found in warmer, temperate zones, and they feature a mix of deciduous trees like oak, maple, and beech, along with some conifers. They experience distinct seasons with vibrant displays of color in the fall.
Ugh. Oh, those beautiful autumn leaves. All right, now for the tropical forests. I'm guessing things get a lot more diverse and humid there.
You're on the right track. Tropical moist forests like the Amazon. They are incredibly biodiverse, and they experience high rainfall and warm temperatures year-round. And they're known for their towering trees and dense vegetation and an abundance of life in every nook and cranny.
Sounds like a naturalist's dream.
Yeah.
What about tropical dry forests?
Tropical dry forests are found in regions with these distinct wet and dry seasons. So they're still quite diverse, but they've adapted to cope with periods of drought. So many trees shed their leaves during the dry season to conserve water.
That makes sense. So what about those sparse tree and savanna forests?
These are kind of like transitional zones between the forests and the grasslands, so they have a scattered distribution of trees, and the canopy doesn't fully close, which allows sunlight to reach the ground and support grasses and other plants.
Interesting. It's like a blend of 2 ecosystems. And finally, we have plantations. Are those considered a type of forest?
Yeah, they are. So plantations are forests that are specifically planted and managed for timber production. They often consist of a single tree species and are managed for fast growth and efficient harvesting.
So plantations are more like cultivated forests, designed for a specific purpose. It's amazing how many different forms that forest can take. And to think there are an estimated 3 trillion trees in the world.
It's a lot of trees.
That's a mind-boggling number. Speaking of mind-boggling, we've covered a lot of ground already, from ancient forests to the different layers and types we see today. But there's another crucial aspect we need to discuss, and that's human impact. How have our activities shaped forests over time?
Yeah, that's a very crucial question, and one that has a complex answer. Human activities have had both positive and negative impacts on forests. On one hand, deforestation has been a major issue, driven by activities like logging and agriculture and urbanization. And this loss of forests has far-reaching consequences for biodiversity and climate change and even human livelihoods. But on the other hand, there's also been this growing movement towards sustainable forest management and reforestation efforts.
It sounds like we're at a turning point in our relationship with forests. Can you tell me more about this concept of sustainable forest management?
Yeah. Sustainable forest management is really all about finding that balance between using forest resources and ensuring their long-term health and productivity. And it involves considering the ecological, social, and economic values of forests and making decisions that benefit both people and the environment.
So it's not just about protecting forests from harm, but also using them wisely to meet our needs.
Precisely. So sustainable forestry practices include things like selective logging, replanting trees, and protecting biodiversity. It's about ensuring that forests can continue to provide us with the resources and ecosystem services that we rely on, while also maintaining that ecological integrity for future generations.
I'm curious about this shift towards sustainable forestry. What's driving this change? Is it purely out of concern for the environment, or are there other factors at play?
It's a combination of factors. Certainly, growing awareness of the environmental importance of forests is a major driver. People are realizing that forests are essential for climate regulation and water quality and biodiversity conservation. But there's also economic incentives at play. So sustainable forestry can provide long-term economic benefits, such as a steady supply of timber and non-timber forest products, as well as opportunities for ecotourism and recreation. And let's not forget the cultural significance of forests. Many societies have deep-rooted connections to forests, and there is a growing appreciation for their aesthetic and spiritual value.
It's encouraging to hear that there's a growing movement towards sustainable forestry. Are there any specific examples of how this is being implemented around the world?
Yeah, there are many successful examples of sustainable forest management practices in action. One prominent example is the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC certification. So the FSC is an international organization that sets standards for responsible forest management, and products that bear the FSC label have been sourced from forests that meet these standards, ensuring that they've been managed in an environmentally sound, socially beneficial, and economically viable way.
So as consumers, we can actually look for that FSC label to support sustainable forestry. That's empowering.
It is. And there's other positive trends as well. For instance, there's a phenomenon called forest transition, where regions shift from net forest loss to net forest gain.
Wait, really? So some parts of the world are actually gaining forest? How is that happening?
Yeah, it's happening in several places. So this transition is driven by various factors, including increased tree planting efforts and the adoption of agroforestry techniques, and even the spontaneous regeneration of forests on abandoned agricultural land.
It's amazing to think that we can actually reverse the trend of deforestation. It gives me hope for the future of forests.
It's definitely a sign of progress. But it's important to remember that new forests aren't always equivalent to old-growth forests in terms of biodiversity and ecological complexity. It takes time for a forest to develop those characteristics.
That's a good point. So while reforestation is a positive step, we still need to prioritize the protection of existing old-growth forests.
Absolutely. They're irreplaceable treasures that provide invaluable ecological services. Speaking of protection, did you know that there are over 726 million hectares of forest in protected areas worldwide?
That's impressive. So are we seeing a global trend towards designating more land for forest conservation?
Yes, the area of protected forest has been increasing globally, which is a positive sign. But it's crucial that these protected areas are effectively managed to ensure their long-term conservation. There are still challenges such as illegal logging and encroachment that need to be addressed.
It's a constant battle, but it's clear that we need to stay vigilant in our efforts to protect forests.
Absolutely. And those efforts can take many forms. We've talked about sustainable forestry in protected areas, but there are also initiatives like urban forestry, which focuses on managing trees and green spaces within cities.
I've heard of urban forestry. What are the benefits of having trees in cities?
They provide a surprising number of benefits. Trees in urban areas can help reduce air pollution, mitigate the urban heat island effect, and even improve mental well-being. They also provide habitat for wildlife and make cities more aesthetically pleasing.
It's amazing how even a small patch of trees can make such a difference in an urban environment. It really highlights the interconnectedness of nature and human well-being.
Exactly. And there's even a growing trend towards incorporating forests into education, with initiatives like forest schools and kindergartens.
Forest schools. Tell me more.
So forest schools are a type of outdoor education where children learn through hands-on experiences in natural settings. So they spend time exploring forests and engaging in nature-based activities and developing a deeper connection to the natural world.
That sounds fantastic. It's a great way to foster environmental awareness and appreciation in young people.
It is, and it's just one example of how we can integrate forests into our lives in more meaningful ways.
This has been an eye-opening conversation. I've learned so much about the incredible complexity and importance of forests. From their ancient origins to the role they play in our modern world, forests are truly essential for the health of our planet and our own well-being.
I'm glad you found it informative. There's always more to learn about forests, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a good foundation.
It certainly has. I'm feeling inspired to learn more and to do my part in supporting healthy forests.
That's great to hear. And I think that's a perfect segue to our next topic, which is all about forest management practices in different parts of the world. Let's start by exploring the unique approach to forestry in Canada.
I'm ready to dive into that. I've always been fascinated by Canada's vast forests and their importance to the country's identity and economy. So tell me, what sets Canadian forestry apart from other approaches?
One of the key things that distinguishes Canadian forestry is the emphasis on public ownership. Over 90% of Canada's forest land is publicly owned, which means that the government plays a major role in its management. And about 50% of that public forest land is allocated for timber harvesting.
So it's a balance between conservation and resource extraction. How does Canada ensure that those harvesting operations are done sustainably?
Sustainability is a core principle of Canadian forestry. So the allocated areas for harvesting are managed using the principles of sustainable forest management, which involve extensive consultation with local communities and stakeholders. And Canada has made significant strides in forest certification. Over 1.2 million square kilometers of forest land have been certified as being sustainably managed, which is about half the global total.
That's impressive. Are there any specific practices that are commonly used in sustainable forestry in Canada?
One of the key practices is ensuring that harvested areas are adequately regenerated. This means that logging companies are required by law to replant trees or ensure natural regeneration after harvesting. There are also regulations in place to limit the size of clear cuts, which are areas where all the trees are removed.
I've heard a lot about the controversy surrounding clear cutting.
Mm.
Is it still a common practice in Canada?
While clearcutting is still used in some cases, it's becoming less prevalent as sustainable forestry practices gain traction. And when it is used, there are strict regulations in place to minimize its environmental impact.
That makes sense. So it sounds like Canada has a pretty robust system in place for managing its forests. What about other countries? Are there any other examples of unique or innovative approaches to forestry that you can share?
Absolutely. Let's take a look at Latvia, for example. This small Baltic nation has seen a remarkable increase in its forest cover over the past century.
Really? What's behind that increase?
A major factor is the forestation of land that was previously used for agriculture. As Latvia's economy has shifted away from agriculture, many abandoned fields have naturally regenerated into forests.
So it's a case of forests reclaiming their former territory. What's the current state of forests in Latvia?
Today, forests cover over 50% of Latvia's land area, which is a significant increase from just a few decades ago, and the country is committed to sustainable forest management. A large portion of Latvia's forests is publicly owned, and there are strict regulations in place for timber harvesting and forest conservation.
It's inspiring to see a country actively increasing its forest cover. Are there any other notable aspects of Latvian forestry?
One interesting feature is the diversity of tree species. Birch, pine, and spruce are the most common, but there's also a good mix of other hardwoods like alder, aspen, and oak. This diversity contributes to the ecological resilience of Latvian forests.
It's fascinating how different countries have developed their own unique approaches to forest management, often shaped by their history, culture, and economic circumstances.
Exactly. And speaking of different approaches, let's shift our focus to the United States, a country with a vast and diverse forest landscape.
I'm eager to hear about forestry in the U.S. I know there's a lot of debate and controversy surrounding forest management practices there. Can you give us an overview of the current situation?
Historically, forests in the U.S. have been heavily impacted by human activities, including logging, agriculture, and urbanization. But in recent decades, there's been a growing push towards more sustainable forestry practices, driven by both environmental concerns and economic considerations.
So it's a similar trend to what we've seen in Canada and Latvia. Are there any specific challenges or controversies that are unique to the U.S. context?
One of the key challenges in the U.S. is the balance between timber production and conservation. The U.S. has a large forest products industry, and there's ongoing debate about how to balance the economic demands for timber with the need to protect forests for their ecological and recreational value.
I can imagine that's a tricky balancing act. Are there any specific policies or initiatives in place to address these challenges?
Yes, there are a number of policies and initiatives aimed at promoting sustainable forestry in the U.S. The U.S. Forest Service, for example, has adopted a multiple-use approach to forest management, which seeks to balance timber production with other uses, such as recreation, wildlife habitat, and watershed protection.
So it's about recognizing the diverse values that forests provide and trying to manage them in a way that benefits multiple stakeholders. Are there any other key players in the U.S. forestry scene?
Absolutely. There are numerous non-governmental organizations or NGOs that play a significant role in advocating for forest conservation and promoting sustainable forestry practices. Organizations like the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, and the World Wildlife Fund are actively involved in research, education, and advocacy efforts related to forests in the U.S.
It sounds like there's a dynamic interplay between government agencies, industry, and NGOs in shaping forest management practices in the U.S.
That's right. And it's important to note that the specific approaches to forestry can vary considerably across different regions of the U.S., reflecting the diversity of forest types and the unique ecological and social contexts of each area.
That makes sense. We've talked about the ecological and economic importance of forests, but I'm also curious about their cultural significance. Can you tell us a bit about how forests have shaped human cultures and societies?
That's a fascinating topic. Forests have played a profound role in human history and culture. They've provided us with shelter, food, medicine, and materials for building and crafting. In many cultures, forests are seen as sacred spaces imbued with spiritual significance. They're often associated with mythology, folklore, and traditional beliefs.
I can see how the presence of forests would have had a deep impact on the way people viewed the world and their place in it.
Absolutely. And even today, forests continue to inspire art, literature, and music. They offer a sense of peace, tranquility, and connection to nature that many people find deeply meaningful.
It's a reminder that forests are not just about trees and ecosystems, they're also about our human connection to the natural world and the values and beliefs that shape our lives.
Well said. And speaking of human connections to forests, we can't overlook the important role that indigenous peoples have played in forest stewardship for centuries.
That's an essential point. I'm eager to learn more about the perspectives and practices of indigenous communities when it comes to forests.
It's a rich and diverse field of knowledge. Indigenous peoples around the world have developed intricate systems of knowledge and practices for managing and coexisting with forests. Their traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations often holds valuable insights into the sustainable use and conservation of forest ecosystems.
I'm curious about the specific ways that indigenous knowledge can inform modern forest management practices.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of how this is happening?
Absolutely. There's a growing movement towards incorporating indigenous knowledge into forest management decisions. For instance, in some regions, indigenous communities are actively involved in co-management arrangements, with government agencies sharing their traditional knowledge and practices to help guide sustainable forestry practices.
That's a great example of collaboration and knowledge sharing. Are there any other key aspects of indigenous perspectives on forests that you can highlight?
One important aspect is the concept of reciprocity. Many indigenous cultures view forests as living entities that deserve respect and care. They believe in taking only what's needed and giving back to the forest in return. This approach emphasizes the interconnectedness between humans and nature and the importance of maintaining balance and harmony within ecosystems.
That's a powerful message that resonates deeply with me. It's a reminder that our relationship with forests should be one of mutual respect and responsibility rather than exploitation.
I agree, and it's a message that's becoming increasingly relevant as we face the challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. Indigenous knowledge and practices can offer valuable insights into how to live sustainably and in harmony with nature.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We've covered so much ground, from the ecological complexities of forests to the diverse ways that humans have interacted with them throughout history.
It's been a pleasure sharing my knowledge with you. I hope you've gained a deeper appreciation for the importance of forests and the need to protect and manage them wisely.
I definitely have, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more crucial aspect of forests that we need to explore: their role in mitigating climate change.
That's a critical topic. Forests are often referred to as the lungs of the planet for their ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. This process, known as carbon sequestration, makes forests essential allies in the fight against climate change.
I've heard a lot about the importance of forests for carbon sequestration. Can you explain exactly how this process works?
So as trees grow, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in their wood leaves and roots. This stored carbon remains locked away as long as the tree is alive, and even for a period of time after it dies.
So it's like forests are acting as giant carbon sinks, helping to remove excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Exactly. And the scale of this carbon storage is immense. Forests are estimated to store about twice as much carbon as is currently in the atmosphere.
That's incredible. It really underscores the importance of protecting and restoring forests as a climate change mitigation strategy.
It does, but it's important to note that the effectiveness of forests as carbon sinks can be affected by various factors, such as deforestation, forest degradation, and climate change itself.
I'm curious about how climate change can impact the ability of forests to sequester carbon. Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly, as temperatures rise and weather patterns become more extreme, forests can become more vulnerable to stresses like drought, pests, and wildfires. These stresses can lead to tree mortality and forest degradation, which can release stored carbon back into the atmosphere.
So it's a delicate balance. We need to protect forests to maintain their carbon storage capacity, but climate change is making that more challenging.
That's right. It's a complex interplay of factors, and it highlights the urgency of addressing climate change and its impacts on forest ecosystems.
This has been an incredibly informative discussion. I've learned so much about the vital role that forests play in regulating our climate and the challenges they face in a changing world.
It's been a pleasure sharing this knowledge with you. I hope it inspires you and our listeners to become advocates for the protection and sustainable management of these invaluable ecosystems.
Absolutely. And speaking of advocacy, I think it's time to shift our focus to a topic that's close to my heart: the importance of forests for human health and well-being. I'm a firm believer in the power of nature to heal and inspire, and I'm eager to explore the specific ways that forests can benefit our physical, mental, and emotional health.
That's a great topic. There's a growing body of research that supports the idea that spending time in nature, particularly in forests, can have positive effects on our health and well-being.
I've definitely experienced that firsthand. A walk in the woods always leaves me feeling refreshed and revitalized.
Yeah.
But what's the science behind this?
So researchers have found that exposure to forests can lower blood pressure, reduce stress hormones, boost the immune system, and even improve mood and cognitive function. There's even a term for this: forest bathing.
Forest bathing. That sounds intriguing.
It's a practice that originated in Japan, where it's known as Shinrin-yoku. It involves immersing oneself in the sights, sounds, and smells of the forest, engaging all of your senses, and allowing yourself to simply be present in the moment.
It sounds like a form of mindfulness in nature.
Exactly. And studies have shown that even short periods of forest bathing can have measurable benefits for both physical and mental health.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to try incorporating more forest bathing into my routine. Are there any other specific ways that forests can benefit our health?
Absolutely. Forests are also great places for physical activity. Hiking, trail running, and even just walking on uneven terrain can provide a great workout and help improve cardiovascular health and balance.
I love that forests can provide both physical and mental benefits. It's like a one-stop shop for wellness.
It is. And let's not forget the social benefits of spending time in nature. Forests can be great places to connect with friends and family, enjoy shared experiences, and build memories.
That's true. Some of my fondest memories involve camping trips and hikes in the woods with loved ones.
It's clear that forests have a profound impact on our well-being in many ways. They provide a sense of peace, connection, and rejuvenation that can be hard to find in our busy modern lives.
I couldn't agree more. This conversation has really reinforced my belief in the importance of preserving forests for the sake of our planet and our own well-being.
I'm glad to hear that. And speaking of preserving forests, I think it's important to acknowledge the threats they face and the actions we can take to protect them.
That's a crucial topic. We've touched on some of the challenges facing forests, but can you give us a more in-depth look at the specific threats they're facing?
Certainly, deforestation driven by factors like agricultural expansion, logging, and urbanization continues to be a major threat to forests worldwide. And climate change is exacerbating these threats, leading to more frequent and intense droughts, wildfires, and pest outbreaks. Invasive species are also a growing problem, displacing native plants and animals, and disrupting forest ecosystems.
It's a daunting list of challenges. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of such large-scale threats. But what can we do as individuals to make a difference?
There are actually many things we can do, even in our daily lives, to support forest conservation. One of the most important is to be conscious consumers. Choose products made from sustainably harvested wood, look for the FSC label, and support companies that are committed to responsible forestry practices.
That's great advice. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of my purchasing choices from now on. Are there any other actions we can take?
Absolutely. Reduce your paper consumption by opting for digital documents whenever possible. Support organizations that are working to protect forests through donations or volunteering, and educate yourself and others about the importance of forests and the threats they face.
Knowledge is power. The more we understand about forests and the challenges they face, the more empowered we'll be to take action.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Contact your elected officials and urge them to support policies that protect forests and promote sustainable forestry practices.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in advocating for the health of our forests.
We do. And while the challenges facing forests are significant, there's also reason for hope. We've seen positive trends in reforestation efforts, sustainable forestry practices, and the growing recognition of the importance of forests for climate change mitigation and human well-being.
It's encouraging to hear that there are glimmers of hope amidst the challenges. It's a reminder that our actions do matter and that collective efforts can make a real difference.
Absolutely. And speaking of collective efforts, I think it's time to shift our focus to a topic that's gaining increasing attention: the role of forests in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
I'm intrigued. I know that the Sustainable Development Goals are a global call to action to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. But how do forests fit into this framework?
Forests play a crucial role in achieving many of the Sustainable Development Goals, from ending poverty and hunger to combating climate change and protecting biodiversity. For example, forests provide livelihoods for millions of people around the world, particularly in developing countries.
So forests are essential for economic sustainability and poverty reduction.
Exactly. And they also play a vital role in ensuring food security. Forests provide a variety of food products such as fruits, nuts, mushrooms, and game animals. They also support agriculture by regulating water cycles, preventing soil erosion, and providing habitat for pollinators.
It's amazing how forests contribute to so many aspects of our well-being.
They do. And let's not forget their role in combating climate change. As we discussed earlier, forests act as carbon sinks, absorbing and storing vast amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This makes them essential for mitigating climate change and its impacts.
It's a reminder that protecting and restoring forests is not just an environmental issue, it's also crucial for addressing social and economic challenges.
Absolutely. And the Sustainable Development Goals recognize this interconnectedness. They highlight the need for integrated approaches that consider the environmental, social, and economic dimensions of sustainability.
I'm curious about how the Sustainable Development Goals are being implemented in relation to forests. Are there any specific initiatives or projects that are underway?
Yes, there are numerous initiatives at both the global and national levels that are focusing on the role of forests in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, the United Nations Forum on Forests, or UNFF, is a key platform for international cooperation on forest issues, promoting sustainable forest management and addressing the linkages between forests and the Sustainable Development Goals.
So it's a space for countries to come together and share knowledge experiences and best practices related to forest management and conservation.
Exactly. And there are also numerous national-level initiatives. Many countries are incorporating forest conservation and sustainable management into their national development plans and strategies, recognizing the crucial role that forests play in achieving broader sustainability goals.
It's encouraging to see this level of commitment to forests and their role in sustainable development.
It is, and there's growing recognition that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will require transformative changes in the way we interact with forests. This includes shifting towards more sustainable consumption and production patterns, reducing deforestation and forest degradation, and promoting the restoration of degraded ecosystems.
That's a crucial point. Forest restoration is about more than just planting trees, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. It's about restoring the entire ecosystem, taking into account the ecological, social, and economic aspects of the landscape. It's a holistic approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of forests with their surrounding environments and the communities that depend on them.
I'm curious about some of the specific ways that forest restoration is being implemented around the world. Are there any innovative approaches or success stories that you can share?
There are many inspiring examples of forest restoration projects happening globally. One approach that's gaining traction is called forest landscape restoration, which, as I mentioned, goes beyond simply planting trees. It involves restoring the entire ecosystem. One inspiring example of this approach is the Bond Challenge, a global effort to restore 350 million hectares of degraded and deforested land by 2030.
350 million hectares, that's a huge area. What are some of the key strategies being used to achieve this ambitious goal?
The Bond Challenge promotes various restoration approaches, including natural regeneration, assisted regeneration, and agroforestry, which involves integrating trees into agricultural systems. It's not just about planting trees in empty spaces, it's about finding ways to restore forests in ways that benefit both people and the environment.
So a more sustainable and integrated approach. Are they making any progress?
They are. The Bond Challenge is already seeing some impressive results. Over 60 countries have pledged to restore over 210 million hectares of land, a significant step towards achieving the 2030 goal.
It's encouraging to see this global commitment to forest restoration. It shows a growing awareness of the vital role forests play in our planet's health.
It does, and it highlights the potential for positive change when people work together towards a common goal. But we also need to be realistic about the challenges. The challenges and opportunities related to forest restoration can vary greatly depending on the region. For example, the Amazon rainforest faces immense pressure from deforestation driven by agricultural expansion, illegal logging, and mining.
The Amazon is often in the headlines for those reasons. What are the implications of this loss, both for the region and the world?
The deforestation of the Amazon has devastating consequences for biodiversity and climate change and the livelihoods of indigenous communities. The Amazon is home to 10% of the world's known species and plays a critical role in regulating global climate patterns.
It's a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our planet. What's being done to combat deforestation in such a vast and complex region?
There are growing efforts to combat deforestation in the Amazon, using a combination of government policies, law enforcement, community-based conservation initiatives, and sustainable development projects. It's a multifaceted approach that requires collaboration among various stakeholders.
Are there any specific success stories that you can highlight?
One notable example is the work of indigenous communities in protecting their ancestral lands and managing forests sustainably. Many indigenous groups have been living in the Amazon for centuries and have developed intricate systems of knowledge and practices for coexisting with the rainforest.
It makes sense that they would be at the forefront of conservation efforts, given their deep connection to the land and their understanding of the delicate balance of the rainforest ecosystem.
Exactly. Their traditional ecological knowledge is proving invaluable in informing conservation strategies and restoration efforts.
Their insights are essential. We need to learn from those who have lived in harmony with nature for generations. Shifting gears a bit, let's move to another region facing significant forest challenges. Africa. What are the key issues and opportunities there?
Africa is a continent of immense diversity, both in its ecosystems and its human populations. Forests in Africa provide a wide range of ecosystem services, from timber and non-timber forest products to water regulation and the climate change mitigation. However, they face various threats, including deforestation driven by agricultural expansion, population growth, and illegal logging.
These issues seem to echo what we've discussed about other regions. Are there any specific challenges unique to Africa?
Many challenges facing forests are global. However, the specific context and drivers of deforestation can vary considerably from region to region. Factors like poverty, political instability, and weak governance structures can exacerbate these challenges in certain areas, making sustainable forest management more difficult.
So how are these challenges being addressed in Africa?
There are various initiatives underway. Community-based forestry programs are empowering local communities to manage and benefit from their forests. There are also efforts to promote sustainable agricultural practices that reduce pressure on forest ecosystems.
Finding solutions that benefit both people and the planet seems to be a common thread in all of these efforts. It's a reminder that sustainable forest management is not just about conservation, it's also about human well-being and social justice.
That's a crucial point. Forests are not just about trees, they're about people and livelihoods. And this brings to mind another important topic: the role of forests in promoting gender equality and empowering women.
I'm interested to hear more about that. How are forests and gender equality connected?
In many parts of the world, women play a vital role in managing and utilizing forest resources. They often rely on forests for food, fuel, medicine, and income generation. However, they frequently face barriers to participating in decision-making processes and accessing resources equitably.
So are you saying that there are gender inequalities within the forestry sector itself?
Yes. Women often have less access to land tenure training and financial resources, limiting their ability to benefit from forests and contribute to their sustainable management.
That's a crucial point. It seems that achieving sustainable forest management requires addressing social inequalities and promoting gender equality.
You're absolutely right. And thankfully, there are growing efforts to empower women in the forestry sector through initiatives that promote their participation in decision-making, provide them with training and resources, and ensure that their rights and needs are considered.
Can you give us any examples of these initiatives?
One example is the Women's Forest Congress, a global network of women working to promote gender equality in forestry. They advocate for policies and programs that support women's leadership and participation in forest management.
It's inspiring to see women taking a leading role in shaping the future of forests.
Their contributions are essential for achieving sustainable and equitable forest management, bringing diverse perspectives and deep understanding to the table. This conversation has highlighted how interconnected forests are with so many aspects of our lives and the planet. From climate change and biodiversity to poverty and gender equality, forests play a crucial role in shaping a sustainable future.
It's become increasingly clear that forests are not just a collection of trees. They are essential components of healthy, resilient, and equitable societies. It's something I'm realizing more and more throughout our conversation.
It's a realization that is gaining momentum globally. And as we move towards a future where sustainability is paramount, this understanding will become even more crucial.
Now, as we near the end of our journey, I'd love to turn our attention to the fascinating world of trees themselves. After all, they are the building blocks of these incredible ecosystems we've been discussing.
That's a perfect way to wrap up our exploration of forests. Trees hold a special place in human culture and imagination, and their diversity and adaptations are truly remarkable.
I've always been in awe of the sheer variety of tree species around the world. From towering redwoods to delicate bonsai trees, there's such an incredible range of forms, sizes, and adaptations.
It's true. Trees have evolved to thrive in a wide range of environments, from scorching deserts to the frigid Arctic. Their adaptations are testaments to the power of evolution and the resilience of life.
I'm particularly curious about the unique adaptations that allow trees to survive in such diverse conditions. What are some of the most remarkable adaptations you've encountered?
One fascinating example is how trees in arid environments conserve water. Some trees, like the baobab, have evolved massive trunks that store water during the rainy season, enabling them to survive prolonged periods of drought.
It's like having their own built-in reservoirs. Amazing. And what about trees in colder climates? How do they cope with freezing temperatures?
Trees in cold regions have developed various adaptations to protect themselves from frost damage. Conifers, for example, have needle-shaped leaves that reduce water loss and prevent ice crystals from forming.
It sounds like they've evolved their own antifreeze system. Incredible. It's a reminder that even in the harshest environments, life finds a way.
It certainly does, and those are just a couple of examples. The diversity of adaptations in the tree world is truly astounding.
I'm also fascinated by how trees interact with each other and other organisms in the forest. Can you tell us a bit about these intricate relationships?
Trees are not solitary beings. They constantly interact with each other and with other organisms in the forest through complex networks of communication and cooperation. It's a reminder that forests are not simply collections of individual trees, but intricate communities of interconnected life.
I've heard about the wood wide web, a network of underground fungal filaments that connect trees and allow them to communicate and share resources. Can you tell us more about that?
The Wood Wide Web is a fascinating area of research. Scientists have discovered that trees can communicate with each other through underground networks of fungal mycelia. These networks allow trees to share nutrients, water, and even warnings about pests and diseases.
It's like an underground social network for trees. That's incredible. What other types of relationships exist within these forest communities?
There are many other fascinating relationships between trees and other organisms. For example, some trees have symbiotic relationships with nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in their roots. These bacteria convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form that trees can use as fertilizer.
So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. The bacteria provide nutrients, and the tree provides a home.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget the countless animal species that rely on trees for food shelter and nesting sites. From insects and birds to mammals and reptiles, trees provide habitat and sustenance for a vast array of creatures.
It's mind-boggling to think about the intricate web of life that a forest supports.
Trees are the foundation of forest ecosystems. Their interactions with other organisms create a complex web of life that is essential for the health and well-being of our planet.
This exploration of trees has been amazing. Their adaptations, their relationships, and their sheer diversity highlight the beauty, complexity, and interconnectedness of the natural world.
Trees are remarkable beings that deserve our admiration and respect. They are essential for the health of our planet and the well-being of all living creatures, including ourselves.
I'm starting to understand that now more than ever. And as we conclude this part of our deep dive into the world of forests, I'm curious to know more about what we can do to help protect these vital ecosystems.
That's a great transition. We can explore the various ways individuals can contribute to forest conservation and sustainable management in the next part of our discussion.
So given everything we've learned about the importance of forests, what can we do to protect them? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges, but I'm hoping you can give us some practical advice on how to make a difference.
You're right, the challenges are significant, but there are many actions we can take both individually and collectively to support forest conservation. One of the most important is being conscious consumers. Choosing products made from sustainably harvested wood, looking for that FSC label we talked about earlier, supporting companies committed to responsible forestry practices. Those choices have a ripple effect.
Those are great everyday actions we can take. What about beyond our shopping carts? What else can we do?
We can reduce our overall consumption, especially when it comes to paper. Opting for digital documents, reusing paper whenever possible, and choosing recycled paper products all help reduce demand.
Those are great practical steps. I'm also thinking about those forest conservation organizations you mentioned earlier. How can we support their work?
Supporting organizations like the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, and the World Wildlife Fund is a fantastic way to get involved. Donations, of course, help fund their crucial work, but volunteering is also incredibly valuable. They often need help with everything from planting trees to educating the public.
It's good to know there are so many ways to contribute. We've talked a lot about the scientific and practical aspects of forest conservation. But I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the cultural and spiritual value of forests. I think that connection is something we can all tap into.
I agree. Forests have held deep cultural and spiritual significance for humans throughout history. They've been sources of inspiration for art, literature, music, and mythology. Spending time in forests, practicing forest bathing, connecting with nature on a deeper level, these experiences can foster a sense of awe, wonder, and respect for these ecosystems.
It's about recognizing that forests are more than just resources to be exploited. They're sources of beauty, inspiration, and connection that enrich our lives in profound ways.
Exactly. And that connection can fuel our desire to protect them. It's that sense of responsibility for future generations that can inspire us to make changes in our own lives and advocate for policies that protect forests.
It's empowering to realize that we all have a role to play in ensuring a healthy future for forests. This deep dive has been an incredible journey, from the ecological complexities to the cultural significance, from the challenges to the inspiring solutions. I'm walking away with a newfound appreciation for forests and a commitment to do my part in protecting them.
It's been my pleasure to share my knowledge and passion for forests with you. I hope this conversation has inspired you and our listeners to continue learning, exploring, and advocating for these vital ecosystems.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of forests. We hope you've learned something new, felt a spark of inspiration, and are ready to embrace your role as a steward of our planet's forests.